It's difficult to know where to start. I mean, there's more questions there that would occupy a full college course on the topic, but I'll do my best. First of all, in reply to Deputy Crow, I think the build-up to Paris was the key to its success. As someone who did attend the abortive Copenhagen conference and came away disillusioned and realising that that had set us all back, if you like, by 6 or 7 years to get back on track for where we hoped we would be after Copenhagen, there was a sense in the world community that it couldn't happen again that way in Paris. And I think there were a number of things that conspired here, if you like, to get the choreography right before Paris actually happened. The first was if you like, the efforts by President Obama to forge an agreement with China. And that agreement was forged in obviously the later stages of his presidency, but one which, if you like, took a lot of the sting out of any agreement that might be reached for the rest of the world. The second thing was the efforts of the Secretary-General, Ban Ki-moon, who worked tirelessly over the past few years to try and bring world leaders together in the build-up to Paris to ensure that an agreement was reached. And I know there were several summit meetings in the United Nations. He travelled throughout the world on a one-to-one basis with many leaders to get them on side before Paris. And thirdly, it has to be said, was the efforts of the French diplomatic system. We were blessed indeed here in Ireland by having a very active French ambassador who was himself a negotiator at Kyoto in his earlier days, and who also worked behind the scenes quite actively within the Irish system here, but as part of a large-scale effort in the global sense. The French diplomatic system worked very hard. I think President Hollande visited most of the key people at least once over the course of the previous year. The fourth thing, which was quite influential behind the scenes, was actually the papal encyclical Laudate Si. Here was something which was written in plain English, which was not sort of overburdened by theology, if you like, but which could actually bring the message home to people in a very effective way. And I think it had a very profound background effect on many of the political figures around the world since its establishment, since its publication in June. All of them set the scene for what was going to be, I think, a conference that once you arrived in Paris, you sensed right away that the mood was different from all the other COPs that I certainly had been to. And there was a feeling that an agreement was going to emerge, and so it did. It was, of course, optimism, which after, I think, the third day of the second week, dissipated briefly when things went down on paper and when negotiators didn't see their little pet projects appearing. But it was resurrected, and it was eventually something which did achieve quite a considerable framework agreement. And I think that's the important point today. It's a framework agreement which puts the ball back in countries' courts. It's up to the countries now to live up to the obligations they made. I can address a couple of the other points briefly. The point Deputy Byrne was bringing up about the Shannon, a very valid point indeed, because it does bring home to us the consequences at a local level for what's happening at a global level. And just to give you a little snippet of scientific research that was published by the UK Met Office in December, where they estimated that the 10-day extreme rainfall event which they had experienced in the UK, the probability of that happening was now increased sevenfold as a result of the loading of the atmosphere by greenhouse gases, done by very comprehensive modelling efforts. So it's bringing home to us the fact that we do face a greatly increased hazard. And I think there are adaptation responses that we can make to that. You're very right in the sense that we can, with judicious planting, reduce flood hazard in some places. We can also, with judicious planting of forests in some places, gain some sequestration of carbon, which will help us with our obligations in the future. But we do have to be very careful where we plant new forests. If we plant them in carbon-rich soils, and we remove the carbon from the soils as a consequence, we're actually undoing some of the benefits that we would otherwise achieve. So it has to be done with a very careful policy in mind. In terms of farming, I think we now have to face the fact that the farmers of Ireland, who are among the people I admire most in this country, they are excellent farmers and excellent stewards of the landscape. And I think we have to maybe think about rewarding them in terms of putting some of the single farm payment towards farmers who are willing to maybe let their lands flood in the winter time close to the Shannon, to allow that reservoir of water to be stored for a while rather than to run down the river and flood high immunity urban land elsewhere. So we need thinking out of the box, I think, on how we manage the area around the Shannon. It's a bugbear we all know for almost a century at this stage, but there are options available to it. In terms of what should we be doing, what do we not like to see in the Paris Agreement, the most significant decision was the ratcheting effect. The effect whereby each 5 years a country has to come back with efforts which are increased. Now, that may not sound all that bad now, but multiply it by 10, 15, 20 years, and we will find that we're getting to grips, hopefully, if that's implemented, with the problem. The most disappointing? The most disappointing for me was the absence of shipping and aviation from the agreement. Those very powerful interest groups managed to get themselves excluded. And if you add up the emissions from shipping and aviation globally, today they account for the combined emissions of the UK and Germany. So it's a very substantial loss. Now, we do hope that their aspirations and their commitments that they made to tighten up their emissions and to avoid burning high sulphur and high heavy fuel oil where it's not necessary will actually begin to produce results in that area. Oil prices are a problem, as Deputy Mitchell was saying. It's a two-edged problem. As oil prices fall, fertiliser costs for the developing world will fall also, so that some farmers will actually, in the developing world, will benefit quite considerably from their ability to farm more efficiently. For some of the large developing countries like India and Brazil, it may be more of a problem, and it may well be that they would prefer a higher oil price. We have to think about how we're going to spend the taxation from energy, I think, in that situation of falling oil prices. Should we ring-fence more of it towards encouraging renewable energy, for example? The climate bill, what would I change? The awareness issue that was raised, I think, by Deputy O'Sullivan is very important. The budget for climate awareness in the last 5 years has been very, very small indeed in this country. I don't think much has been spent on enhancing climate awareness, apart from issues like the encouragement of the green school system and so on. And I would like to see, I think, more of that. Responsibility and policy coherence is critical here. And that's why I would have hoped that responsibility for the climate change bill would have been taken by the Department of the Taisce, rather than left to individual silos to fight their corner individually. And that's been a bugbear, I think, which has affected progress on mitigation over the past few years. Animals and plants, I think we do tend to forget about biodiversity too much. I think you're very right, and I think the encyclical actually was very strong on this point, that we share this planet with other organisms and we have no right to effectively render them extinct to suit our own needs. So it is a very valid ethical point which I think we have to take cognizance of as well. I think I've talked enough. I think I should pass on to somebody else at this point.